This happened when I was 21 years old in my first semester of college. I attended school in a major city in the US, and it was definitely no cheap school. My tuition averaged about $7,000, excluding books and other expenses, and I didn't have the money to cover it. At the time, I worked as a part-time security guard at my local mall to pay for school. Because of this, I worked extra hours and even had to take night shifts when the mall was closed. The mall was huge, and we'd oftentimes have 2 security guards patrolling the building. However, the other security guard had quit his job and went to go make a living in watchmaking. Apparently, he's obviously never heard of a 2 weeks notice, and due to his lack of responsibility, I had to cover for him. This happened around 4 months ago, and I had been scheduled to work an 8-hour shift from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. I didn't have school the next day, so that would give me plenty of time to sleep considering how tired I'd be. I won't go into any additional details, so I'll just cut straight to the chase. It was around 2 a.m., and I was sitting in my chair while listening to music when my iPod died. Frustrated, I take out my phone and begin to play a few games to keep myself occupied. As I'm playing my game, I then hear what sounded like someone humming from down the hall. I was in front of a store in the mall, and I shined my flashlight toward the direction from where I heard it. Excuse me, the mall is closed. You're not supposed to be here." However, once I made my presence known, the humming had stopped as if a switch were turned off. Curious, but wanting to keep myself safe, I get up and start walking to the direction of the humming. I follow the humming, but no matter how far I went, it didn't seem to get louder or softer. I continue walking until I eventually give up on finding this person. The humming had stopped for the rest of the night, and I had went on with the remainder of my shift. The next week, I had told my boss about the humming I heard the other night. Instantly, his face turned pale and his eyes were wide. What he said next would all make sense. He had said that many years back, a woman had died in one of the bathrooms near the area I was patrolling. Up until now, there had been several reports of people hearing faint humming noises around the mall.
I was a night shift clerk at a 24-hour gas station back in the late 90s, before they had credit card readers on every pump. I had been doing it for 2 years already, and it was a good job since I went to college during the day. It was tiresome, but it paid bills and gave me some spending cash for beer and things like that. The gas station I worked at was on the edge of town, so we got very little traffic late at night, but truckers came through often enough to make it worthwhile to stay open. This suited me well because I would spend all my downtime studying until the next shift came in at 2 a.m. This was probably the only really crazy thing that happened to me while working there, so I remember it well. It was late fall, Friday night I think, and things had been real quiet that night. I'd say that normally we'd get 4 or 5 people through every hour or so. But this night, it was an hour until the end of my shift, and I had only seen a trucker and one other late-night motorist. As I was saying, it was about 1 o'clock and all was silent. I was nodding off over my textbooks, organic chemistry or something like that, when the chime sounded alerting me that someone had walked in. The man looked pretty raggedy. He had a long wool coat on, a beanie, and his salt and pepper beard reached down to his chin. I could tell from 20 feet away that his eyes were bloodshot. They were so red, and the heavy smell of marijuana and booze filled the store as soon as he entered. Like I said before, the store is at the edge of town. I had never had anyone walk in that late at night since it was about 10 miles from any residential area. He staggered up and down each aisle, looking at various products and then putting them back down. I wasn't really nervous, honestly, because he wasn't a very imposing figure, short and really skinny. If anything, I would have expected him to try and grab some food and make a run for it. Once he started to make his way back through the aisles a second time, I asked if he needed some help. He kind of grunted and just kept doing what he was doing. I thought maybe he was just trying to warm up before moving on again and let him be. I went back to reading my book, and not even a few minutes later, he was at the checkout stand. It scared me a little because I never heard him walk up to me. He was suddenly there and slurred out, "You got any cigarettes?" Now there was a whole wall of cigarettes behind me, so I asked him what type. He said, No. I mean, do you have any on you?" I told him I didn't smoke, but if he wanted to purchase some, I could do that for him. This next thing I'll never forget. His face went blank, and I could tell he was staring at something behind me, so I turned to see what he was looking at. There was nothing there except the wall and all the cigarettes we had on display. I turned back around and he let out a blood-curdling scream, pointed at something, and a look of absolute shock was plastered on his face. You know that scene from Invasion of the Body Snatchers? It's an older film, and I'm thinking of the one from 1978, where at the end Donald Sutherland has been turned into a pod person, and he's pointing and screaming. I've seen it come back in memes sometimes. Anyways, it kind of reminded me of that, but he looked even more terrified. He then reached over the counter and grabbed me by my shirt, pulling me to him real close, and screamed, "They're here! They're here!" before pushing me back and running out the door. That scared the shit out of me, and I was hoping it was the last I would see of him. But a minute or two later, he was out in front, pacing back and forth, yelling at nothing and occasionally hitting himself in the head with a closed fist. I didn't know what else to do, so I locked the door quickly and watched him for a moment. When it became apparent he wasn't going to leave, I called the cops and let them know he was being a nuisance. They said they would send someone over to pick him up. I couldn't risk him doing something to a customer if one happened to come by, or a customer doing something to this poor man that clearly was not mentally well. From the time I called the cops until they showed up was only about 15 minutes, but in that time, a 90-something Honda Accord pulled up. At first, I worried a customer would be bothered, but then I saw a man, probably in his late 20s. It was hard to tell with the lights washing him out, and he started to talk to the mentally ill man. Then I saw the younger man lead the other one to his car. Before I could unlock the door and make it out of there, they were gone. The police later showed up, and I gave a description of everything that happened and of the car and the younger man as best I could. I don't know whatever happened to the mentally ill man or the younger one. I sometimes think that maybe the younger one was the son, friend, or relative of the ill one, and he was taking him somewhere safe. But it could have been something more sinister.
About a year ago, in my final semester in college, I worked at a Shaw's grocery store in Boston, Massachusetts. For those of you who don't know what Shaw's is, it's basically a grocery store that's mainly based in the Northeast. I didn't have a car yet, so I mainly requested for day shifts as I've always been skeptical of the night. It wasn't that I hated them. It was more so the fear of what could happen, especially to a petite 5'7" girl like me. However, sometimes I'd be given a closing shift, much to my annoyance, as I had a 7:45 a.m. class and we closed pretty late. Whenever I did have a closing shift, we'd end up closing at 10, and it's about an hour's bus ride back home. My managers, being the jerks that they were, gave me a week of closing shifts knowing my situation. I was pissed, but whatever. It's a few $100s added to my paycheck, so I couldn't argue with that. It was a Thursday night, and I had just finished stocking a few chips as we had just gotten an extra shipment. It was me, my manager, and another coworker running the register. It's about an hour before we close, and the store's pretty much dead except for a few customers. I finish putting the chips on the shelves and get ready to clock out. Before doing so, my manager had told me to go outside and bring the shopping carts that were in the parking lot to the store. Living in a decent-sized city, it wasn't uncommon for careless people to leave their carts out in the open. As I'm grabbing a cart beside a car, a woman rolls down her window and says hello. With a friendly smile, I say hello back and asked if I could help her. In the car was a mom and what appeared to be her teenage daughter in the front seat. Right away, the mom seemed concerned, looking back and forth before telling me that they needed gas. I tell her there was a gas station just down the road, but she then interrupts me, asking if I could give her money for gas. She's explaining as to how she just came from another state and was in desperate need. Being a dirt poor college student, I barely made enough to pay for my own tuition. However, I didn't want to decline help to someone in need, so I take out my wallet and hand her a $5 bill. She stares down at the money and then back at me as if she wanted more when she said that it wasn't enough. I told her I was sorry and that was all I had. She then says in a more direct tone if I could get into her car and go down to the gas station to help her get gas. As I was about to respond, that's when I noticed the teenage daughter had been staring at me the whole time. She's sitting in the seat, giving me this dead stare while licking her lips as if she were planning on something. That was my cue to get out of there as something wasn't right. Thankfully, my manager had come out, and when he saw the car, it immediately pulled out of the parking lot and drove off. I remember running up to him and thanking him for noticing. He also knew something was wrong, as he could definitely see the fear and panic of my face. My manager took a picture of the car and was able to identify the year and model of it. I worked at that Shaw's for a good year after that, and never saw that car again.
So this happened a little over 2 years ago now, and I wanted to post it somewhere, just to look back on it one day and never forget the lesson I learned. It was 2016 and I had just started a new job at a motel. It was low pay, but I needed an office job. One of my friends, Michael, got me this job. For a few days, I did training with the owner in the mornings. For 2 nights, Michael trained me. Our job was the 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. shift. Nothing exciting, checking guests in and doing paperwork. My boss, the owner, went away with his wife on vacation for a week, which is attributed to the swift training I had to endure. So it was my first night alone on the night shift. There was a monitor with security cameras around the motel's property and large glass windows all around the office building with a glass door. There was no night window like most motels have. It was fairly early in the night, about 1 a.m. I was just doing my normal check-in paperwork when a man walks in and asks if we have any rooms available. Usually, if someone is sketchy, my boss has me lie and say no, but he seemed pretty normal at the moment. Without hesitation, I said, "Yes, of course, just for one?" And he replied with yes. So I began creating the reservation on the computer when I notice he starts swatting the air and making spitting noises, as if he's being surrounded by flies. I tried to ignore it. As far as I was concerned, it wasn't my business. So I try to check him into the room quickly as possible. I give him his key and he's on his way. At this point in time, I could be described as very timid. I had a lot going on in my personal life, so I hope you can all understand my reaction to what happens next. The man comes back from his room and slams his hand on the glass door and causes me to jump. Absolutely frightened, I look up to see him just staring at me. He cracks the door and puts his head through and says, "I can't get into my room. Why won't you let me get into my room?" And my only defense is trying to be helpful, so I replied, "Maybe there's something wrong with your key. Let me give you another one." The look he had in his eyes was inexplicable. I felt like I was in absolute danger. I handed him his new key and he went back to his room. I tried to text Michael because he's the one who trained me. Though it was the middle of the night and he was asleep, I needed some guidance. With no reply from Michael, I noticed the man trudging down the stairs to come back. I go into absolute panic mode. I run into the back office and lock the door, and I pull out my pocket knife. It's important to keep protection when working at night. I hear the man in the office yelling, "Hello? Hello? Why won't you let me in my room? Do you not like me?" Being an absolute idiot and not standing my ground and calling the police when I'm feeling scared, I decided to take this situation on alone. I reply, "I'm just on the phone, I'll be right out." I then start calling Michael over and over for help. No answer. I decided to take a few deep breaths and then step out of the office. The man wasn't there. He was in the bathroom. I start hearing him talking to himself, angrily saying, "Kill her, kill her." My heart sank. Still being an idiot and not calling the police, he comes out and I say, "Your key was broken. I'm sorry, let me escort you to your room." He agrees, thankfully. I was wearing a long-sleeve sweater, so with my arms down, I was able to hide my knife in my hand while holding it. I began to walk outside, and he seemed insistent to walk behind me. We began making our way to the staircase and up towards his room. I was sweating from how nervous I was, continuously looking behind me to make sure he wasn't going to make a move. He stops at a room, and I stop at his room a few doors down. I smile and say, "Oh, that's the wrong room. This is your room," as it clearly said on the door. The whole time he was going to someone else's room and trying to open the door. I felt bad for them. I quickly ran back to the office and locked the door. The next guest I checked in was a police officer from a few towns away. I felt bad for confiding in them about the guy, but they seemed willing to keep an eye and ear out. The next night, the man came back, but I had the doors locked and told him we were all booked up. I explained to my boss what happened when he got back from vacation. However, he didn't take me seriously. I continued to work there on the night shift for the next year, where many other strange encounters happened. So, strange man, let's never meet again. And if you ever feel uncomfortable, always call the police.